So it's not that part that I didn't understand, but I was confused by what was unfolding within Israel and what felt like an institutional betrayal of our people, of the safety of the Jewish state. And of course, there was a betrayal of, the very fundamentals of humanity, dignity. I mean, the horrific images of women being paraded in the streets of Gaza after being raped. It
So how do
was,
you explain that? We had this Me Too movement, which, and the idea that of empowering women and taking women's word seriously, but it seemed for the first time, if in the only place in the world when women said things regarding what, and I was a firsthand witness on October 7th, I was there. And so the question is, why were Israeli women not believed? Was it a fundamental anger at Israel? Was it baseline anti-Semitism? Again, that gets the betrayal of the progressive movement to women. Why were Israeli women different?
I think it's a combination of things. I think we have allowed over the years for the feminist movement to be minimized and dismissed, and for women's rights to be minimized when it comes to white women or white passing women. And because sort of, the classic feminism, which was criticized for not including brown and black women, people had started to kind of harbor this resentment towards that classic feminist movement, that emerged and solidified in the 60s. Um,
But most Israeli women are Mizrahi or Sephardic.
yeah,
Granted, the ones they know in the United States are 90% Ashkenazi. So,
yeah.
from that point of view, they didn't want to look to see that these were, by our own definition, American definition, women of color.
Yes. So that's the other part of this, is that one, white feminism was dismissed and really resented. And two, Israeli women, um, being perceived as Jewish women in America, were seen as white women, as privileged women, as not worthy of solidarity, because their oppression could never equate that of brown and black women, aka Palestinian women. And so I think that's why most people, most women, most feminists have looked the other way and continue to look the other way. And of course, if they were to overcome their anti Semitic, anti Zionist biases and look into Israel, they would see that more than half of the population is Mizrahi, and I guess what they would call brown here. And on top of that, this is the Middle East. So whatever lens you use to understand intersectionality in the West and in America, and to make sense of the oppressor oppressed dynamic and privileged and non-privileged dynamic, is just not going to apply in the Middle East. And if it's not going to apply in the same way that people understand it here. And if you really want to apply it and to truly understand it, then you have to understand that Jews, being the biggest minority in the Middle East, sit at the bottom of the oppression pyramid, meaning they go through the most type of persecution, the biggest scale of persecution, because we exist in the Middle East as both an ethnic and a religious minority. Plus, on top of that, you're dealing with extremist ideologies that not only target Jews and indigenous minorities and people of different faiths, but also target women.
So
So,
you know the Islamist world because you live there,
very well,
and
yeah.
Islam and Muslim Brotherhood, Sunni type. I'm not talking about Shia jihadists here. Um, in your opinion, from knowing this world and being so involved in this, can somebody with a Brotherhood philosophy ever accept a Jewish national presence in a centimeter of any place in Israel in the Levant?
No, because we have seen the manifestation of the Muslim Brotherhood in a lot of different ways across different countries in the East and in the West. And the one common denominator is their hatred for the Jews and the infidels and the rejection of Israel and their existential mission to eradicate Israel and the Jews and to oppress all minorities and to definitely oppress women. They might show up initially as looking moderate, wearing suits, speaking the language of democracy, of human rights, of fundamental values, but it's only a means to an end. And the end is absolute supremacy and dominance over all other minorities, particularly women and Jews. And that's why the feminist and the Zionist movement should actually hold hands together because they have a common enemy.
So, when you see LGBTQ groups saying queers for Palestine, and then you see progressive kids on these college campuses who say that Israel doesn't have a right to exist and the indigeneity of Israel is artificial. Well, you hear that from the Palestinian leadership, not even talking about Hamas, I'm talking about the PA. How do you deal with it, or you don't even bother to deal with it? I mean, what is your go-to to try to get minds to be open if you're on a college campus?
Yeah, I believe that not everyone is an extremist. A lot of people have the potential to be rehabilitated. A lot of people have the potential to learn the actual historical facts. And the problem is, all over the Middle East and North Africa, we didn't have any Jewish education, any Holocaust education, any religious education that is outside of Islam. And so there was no way for people to actually understand the indigeneity part of the Jewish people. And obviously there's no understanding of Christian history or stories as well. And there is a dominant narrative, which is a revisionist, really an extension of the Islamist revisionist history and narrative, which is that once Islam came to the Prophet Muhammad, all of the other religions were basically canceled. I guess, we can see the similarities with the extreme progressive movement. So everything else was canceled. And more than that, they believe that automatically all the other prophets, including Moses and Jesus Christ, were automatically became Muslims. And so it's a misunderstanding of the faith, of the scripture, of the theology, because what the theology actually means, what Islamic theology means, is that it refers to them as believers, right? As people who had faith. And believer is usually mistranslated as Muslim. And so I don't fault a lot of people who just didn't have access to this education, but I fault them once they are adults and have access to technology for not going through a process of re-education, because I have had to go through that. So many of the people that I know and that I love, with whom we have a lot of solidarity. You spoke to Daria Ziada recently. There's so many people who are products of the Middle East and North Africa and products of this education system that completely erased Jews and Christians and other minorities, who then had access to technology and said, no more, we're going to learn on our own and we're going to reform not just our own thinking, but the society and the environment around us. And so do I have faith in the sort of rehabilitation and change and progress in the region? Absolutely. It will take things to start from the top down, because one, we have to have an expansion of the Abraham Accords and normalization with Israel. Two, we have to have a reform of the education system so that the next generations don't have to go through decades of propaganda. And then that propaganda makes its way to the West in a very strategic, calculated manner, obviously championed by both the Muslim Brotherhood and the IRGC. And so
What about
hope.
What about the Qataris? How dangerous are they in propagating being the financiers of, if you will, the Muslim Brotherhood and the Qatari Foundation and the billions upon billions? That's finally getting a little spotlight on it. Do you feel that that is a huge problem?
So, Eric, you know how I feel about Qatar's actions. I was the first person to call out Qatar's support of extremism and the Muslim Brotherhood and holding it accountable, at least partly, for October 7th. I was the first person to bring that up on American media after October 7th. And more than that, I was the first person to bring it up in DC that week of October 7th. And every space I went into, and I was there with Israel Policy Forum, every meeting I had, everyone looked at me with baffled eyes, completely confused for why I brought up Qatar. Now, I know because I lived through the region through the Arab Spring, and I know that moderate countries in the Middle East have tried to hold Qatar responsible and accountable for supporting the Muslim Brotherhood fractions that try to topple regimes and monarchies across the Middle East and North Africa, therefore, try to destabilize the region, to create vacuums for the Muslim Brotherhood to come into power and to rule in a way that is absolutely fascist and extremist, right? And I also know from Saudi's blockade on Qatar in 2018 that Saudi was trying to force Qatar to break away from the Islamic Republic. Now, unfortunately, there was no support from the West at the time, and also the war on the Houthis in Yemen, in which Saudi and the UAE were engaged, really backfired, especially in terms of PR. And I think, Saudi was basically going through what Israel had been going through in this war since October 7th, meaning that instead of understanding the real threat and having the entire world, the international community, and the NATO countries actually consolidate resources and deal with these extremist organizations, and with the IRGC and the Muslim Brotherhood, instead of doing that, they were just constantly criticizing that one country that tried to take ownership of the extremist threats because they were threatening their sovereignty and their own people. And so Qatar, I had been observing for a long time. Qatar invested in the Muslim Brotherhood in the late 1990s, early 2000s, as a strategy to gain dominance and influence in the region and all over the world. It was pure pragmatic strategic calculation because they invited a bunch of Western consultants and analysts and had them research what the region's going to look like within 10, 20, 30 years. And lo and behold, the prediction said the Muslim Brotherhood will be ruling over most of the region. And that's what happened. And they created failed states all over. Obviously, in Syria, in Yemen, in Libya. Egypt almost became a failed state. It's now a military state. Tunisia almost became a failed state. Now it's basically another military state.
So
And so,
for
yeah.
15 years more, I can empathize with you. I was pounding on, I go to Washington and I've been talking about Qatar, and whether it was Democratic or Republican offices and members of Congress I spoke with, I heard every excuse. And I mean, the Biden administration made Qatar a major American non-NATO ally. President Trump raves about them, and the current special envoy. So where is this blind spot in America for this incredibly wealthy but a nefarious actor that somehow can support the Sunni Muslim Brotherhood, but yet be close to the Shiite jihadists of Iran? Granted, they share the world's largest gas field in the world. But so why are we so accepting of the Qataris?
It's a symptom of the Muslim Brotherhood and how it operates, and an expression of its sophistication, actually, because Qatar essentially speaks that very language of embracing democratic values and just wanting to be a mediator and wanting to lobby for Muslim and Arab rights and just for equality and diversity. And they've really excelled at doing this. And by the way, they had a foundation based in DC that was operating under the guise of promoting Muslim